Jimmy returned for the first time exactly a year after the accident. I was sitting at home alone. My father was at the bar, my mother was dead. We'd stuffed her in a pine box and sent her to the crematorium a few months ago. I sat on the couch, sipping the whiskey I'd stolen the night before while my father was passed out, watching a plump cockroach scurry across the coffee table. I hadn't had time to get drunk yet. At 11, my body handled alcohol as well as the local drunks. There was a knock on the door, the light, fragile thud of knuckles on rotten wood. I froze, the neck of the bottle to my lips. Even the cockroach was wary, its antennae stretched out toward the entrance. The local kids knew better than to come here for sweets. Our rickety house was teetering on the brink of condemnation, and the cobwebs and other living creatures on the windows were anything but festive. I couldn't help but sob when I opened the door and saw his figure. The sheet draped over his head was brown with dirt and soaked with stinking river water. "Jimmy," I croaked, disbelieving my eyes. In response, his jaw dropped limply, and a faint groan came from under the sheet like a creaking door hinge in an old house. He raised his hand, and I recoiled, expecting him to point an accusing finger at me, cursing me for lying and murder, but I immediately realized he was simply holding his palm open, as if waiting for something. A dry wheeze escaped his throat, and suddenly I realized what he wanted. My little brother had returned to celebrate his favorite holiday. I rushed upstairs, under the bed, and got Jimmy his pumpkin-shaped candy bucket. I brushed away the cockroaches, shook out the mouse droppings, and returned to the front door. He was still waiting. Jimmy snatched the bucket from me, and I spotted them, a group of teenagers standing in the shadows. The same bastards who had been harassing us last year, that very night. Back then, they were wearing clown masks. This year, they were in Power Rangers costumes. Despite the masks covering their faces, I realized they couldn't believe their eyes. Jimmy had been dead for a year, but he stood before them wearing the same sheet he'd disappeared in. I've grown up since then. Anger and self-loathing do wonders for a boy's body. Fueled by whiskey and a desperate desire to shift the blame onto someone other than myself, I lunged at them. There were 4 of them, and of course, I took my share of hits, but in the end, 3 ran. And 1 was left lying on the sidewalk, nearly unconscious, bleeding profusely. I returned to Jimmy, smiled, and, as before, hooked my pinky through his. So we went off to celebrate Halloween. I sat on the couch, staring at the flickering candle flame on the coffee table. The power had been out for a month, and I saw no point in turning it back on. It would only waste money I needed for booze. Besides, the city would evict me in a few days anyway. The house had been bought and paid for by some long-dead relative who, out of pity, gave it to my parents. When my father finally died, I inherited the house, but I was still unable to pay the taxes. I wasn't going to miss this place. There are a few good memories in it. At this time of year, I'd usually be out of it, but today was Halloween. I didn't want to miss Jimmy. My life had turned to shit, but I vowed never to let my brother down again. I glanced at my watch, exactly 8 o'clock. I took Jimmy's bucket and went outside. He never explained why he loved Halloween so much. He was a quiet kid, small, pale, and fragile. You wouldn't have guessed it. But he preferred horror movies and bloody slasher marathons to children's cartoons. He didn't even flinch when zombies burst from their graves or demons ripped out teenagers' throats. I didn't think his love of the holiday was for the opportunity to hide behind a mask and pretend to be someone else, although I wouldn't have been surprised. Rather, I always suspected Jimmy loved Halloween because at that time of year, the world itself turned dark and joyfully embraced the horrors of our lives. Vampires, werewolves, and cursed dolls were far more understandable than the nightmares that awaited us at home. Or maybe he just really loved candy. I stepped outside. The neighborhood was ablaze with lanterns and pumpkins glowing jagged smiles on porches. Windows in a soft orange glow, cobwebs. Parents with flocks of children wandering around the houses. And there he was, Jimmy, slowly walking toward me. I swore he grew smaller with each passing year. I waved at him. He didn't respond, merely bowed his head slightly, as if trying to remember who I was. As always, he was wearing the same dirty sheet, soaked with river water. I was overcome with disgust and guilt at the dull brown stains of blood, where the fabric had clinged to the dent in the back of his head. I smiled and handed him the bucket. Jimmy snatched it from my hands. I couldn't see anything through the slits in the sheet I'd cut 25 years ago. but I knew that if he had eyes, they would be shining right now. I lowered my hand, hooked my little finger through his, and led my brother out to collect sweets as I had done every year since he first returned. This hadn't been our neighborhood for a long time. The street names remained the same, but that's where the similarities ended. New tenants moved in, taxes went up, and the old neighbors left. One by one, the old brick houses were torn down, replaced with fashionable but flimsy structures. Soon, our childhood home would suffer the same fate. Jimmy seemed to sense something was wrong. His pinky squeezed mine tighter. He hadn't spoken to me since that night by the river, but the gesture was enough. I'm with you. That's how we supported each other as children. When Mom cried over dinner, sharing a stale piece of social cheese, I'd squeeze Jimmy's pinky. When Dad came home drunk and started hitting Mom, I'd climb onto my brother's narrow bed, and we'd press pillows over our ears and whisper, I'm with you. That evening, we visited every house where the lights were still on. The new neighbors glanced sideways at me, a drunkard holding a child and a tattered sheet by the hand. I didn't care, as long as they threw candy into Jimmy's bucket. Gradually, the street emptied, the children went away, the pumpkins went out. Jimmy and I walked along the empty alleys. We approached the house. Usually, we said goodbye. Here he went back. But today, I stayed close. He bowed his head again, surprised. I squeezed his little finger. I loved Jimmy, but he was still a little brother and I wasn't always kind to him. I hated the bastards on our street, but I learned a thing or two from them. Sometimes I'd bully Jimmy, take his toes just to feel like I had power over someone. The day he died, he especially irritated me. I stole a couple of comic books from a drugstore on York Street and wanted to read them in peace. But Jimmy ran into the room, sobbing. Rats had chewed through his Jason suit. The plastic mask was cracked and the jumpsuit smelled like shit. I told him to deal with his parents, but he said Mom was out cold again and Dad was at the bar. Anger washed over me, not so much at Jimmy, but at everything around me. I had to be the adult again. I fed him, did his laundry, and got him ready for school while his parents drank. All I wanted was one evening of peace, but I couldn't even get that. I held back. I ripped the sheet off his bed, cut out jagged eye sockets, and threw it over his head. There, I said, now you're a ghost. Through the holes, I saw his green eyes shining with joy. Will you come trick or treat with me? He asked. I didn't want to, but I knew that if I didn't go, he'd burst into tears again, and my mother would beat me up. We walked out into the night among crowds of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, and Barbie dolls. Jimmy's costume was stupidly simple, but the kid was happy. I just hoped I wouldn't run into those bastards. I hoped in vain. There were 4 of them, older, bigger. Even the smallest one towered over me. They were wearing plastic clown masks, red-nosed, smiling. The sight of them made my stomach clench. The adults around me didn't notice there were too many kids running around outside. Jimmy clutched the bucket to his chest. One of the bullies reached for it, and I lost it. I might be mad at my brother, but this was his birthday. I couldn't let it be ruined. I hit him. A fist slammed into the clown's face, a crunching sound, and blood spurted from under the mask. I grabbed Jimmy's hand, and we ran. We turned the corner and ducked into an alley. We hid. The bastards ran past. I knew they wouldn't let this go. A couple would wander around the neighborhood, others would hide near our house. What should we do? Jimmy asked, his voice shaking. Every night before I fall asleep, I think I should have just squeezed his pinky, but I didn't. Instead, I blamed him, because if he weren't such a crybaby, we wouldn't be here. So, of all the places to hide, I chose the river, because I knew he was afraid of water. Now the Delaware riverfront is lined with casinos, apartment complexes, and walkways lined with trendy bars. Back then, it was a factory graveyard. Vacant lots overgrown with stinking bushes, rats scurrying through the undergrowth, and the wind howling through the rusting ruins. We'd been here before, and Jimmy always hated it. Even though it was only a quarter-mile from home, he said it was too quiet. He was afraid that if those guys caught us, no one would even know. We walked out onto the pier, a long concrete ledge jutting 50 feet into the water. He walked behind, still wearing a sheet, clutching the bucket convulsively. The waves pounded the pilings, and he shuddered every time, as if afraid the pier would collapse. But Jimmy's biggest fear was falling, that the current would pull him under the pier, and when he surfaced, he'd hit his head on the concrete. Can I please go home? He begged. No. I barked. Do you want them to knock your teeth out? He lowered his head. But I don't like this place. Looking at my brother's trembling shoulders, I finally lost my patience. I wanted to show him who was boss. I grabbed him and dragged him to the very edge. Stop acting like a wimp, I growled. There's nothing to be afraid of here. I want to go home. He screamed, tears streaming down the sheets. Stop being a wimp. I yelled and instinctively pushed him in the shoulder. What happened next happened in seconds, though it lasts an eternity in my memory. I hit him harder than I intended. Jimmy dropped the bucket, got his feet tangled in the sheet, staggered, and fell over the edge. His head hit the concrete, then there was a splash, and he disappeared into the dark water. All that remained on the pier was a red stain and bubbles on the surface, interlocking our little fingers. We walked through parking lots and empty beer gardens to that very pier. For a moment, the past blended with the present, and I saw myself wet, shivering, returning home with my brother's bucket in my hands. I remember jumping into the water, diving until I almost drowned myself, never finding him. I didn't tell anyone what happened. When I returned, my mother was sleeping, my father was drinking. I hid the wet clothes and told him Jimmy had run away. The police searched, but to no avail. My father wasn't particularly upset. A few months later, my mother took 40 sleeping pills and never woke up. I started drinking from my father's bottles to drown my guilt. And so it went. But the relief was always temporary. Now, walking beside Jimmy along the pier, I squeezed his little finger tighter. I was sober and ready to die. We stopped at the edge. He was still as afraid of water as he had been 25 years ago. And then Jimmy stepped forward and disappeared beneath the waves. I thought, when this pier is torn down to make way for a new casino, will he come back for Halloween? Will he find out that our house is now just another apartment complex? In any case, I won't let him go through this alone. I followed. My head hit the concrete edge, a blinding pain pierced the world, and the water closed in on me. A wave slammed me against a piling, and something crunched in my back. When I tried to scream, my mouth filled with murky river water. And then, amid the darkness and pain, I felt my brother's slender little finger squeeze mine. I'm with you. It happened almost a year ago, last Halloween. I wanted to stay with him, but he apparently decided otherwise. I woke up weeks later in the hospital. Doctors removed part of my skull to relieve the pressure from the hemorrhage. My ribs were shattered, the result of brutal resuscitation attempts. They found me on the road, so Jimmy pulled me out of the water and dragged me across the wasteland to the highway. I asked the paramedics if they'd seen a boy in a torn sheet. They said there was no one nearby. I'm writing this now in the library on Girard Avenue, but I have to finish. The librarian doesn't tolerate stinking vagrants like me. It's Halloween again soon. Jimmy may not want me to go back in the water, but I'm going anyway. I have his bucket wheel take one last walk around the neighborhood, and I have a box cutter, the sharpest blade I could find. When Jimmy steps in the water again, I'll slit my wrists, both my arms, then my carotid artery, and jump in after him because I'm his big brother, damn it. And I won't let him swim alone.